This is InEar Insights, the Trust Insights podcast. In this week's InEar Insights, you ever dig up like an old high school or college yearbook and you flip through the photos, you're like, ooh, that's kind of cringy, like the fashion from whatever year or decade that was, and things like that. And it just provides those moments of, that's things have changed a lot. One of the things we were doing last week, while we were preparing for relaunching a website and building case studies and stuff, was digging through old reports that we had put together for clients now years ago, around when the company was first founded. And I had a similar experience looking at one report we did for a food and beverage company, going, ooh, could have done that better. Katie, when you're doing stuff like that, when you're looking back, when you're doing after action reviews in general, but particularly ones like this where it's like opening up a time capsule, how do those things make you feel, and what are sort of the insights that you look for in how you've evolved and the company's evolved in such a long period of time?
Well, I should probably start by saying that my fashion evolution has not evolved at all. Considering today I'm wearing a t-shirt and a flannel shirt, I am dressed exactly the same way I was dressed in high school. So that hasn't changed at all. But when I look at some of the stuff that we started with, it doesn't make me cringe. It just sort of makes me think, you know what, we were trying our best and we didn't know what we didn't know then. And I think if I look back at that and saw we were doing things the exact same way today, so many years later, then I might start cringing, because it would mean that we weren't learning from stuff and we weren't evolving and we weren't trying to continually improve and do better. So I don't get the same cringy, like, oh my God, what were we doing moment, unless we haven't changed anything at all. And that's when I start to go, okay, what's stopping us from feeling like we can do better? So, for example, this week, we're in the process of launching a new website. So, our messaging is evolving, our branding is evolving, and we're starting to pull it all together. When I look back at the logo and the branding that we started with, if we were still using that today, that might be a different, ooh, it doesn't look modern. But when we started, we were just like, okay, this is good enough. So that's the way I look at it when I look back at past stuff we've done, even, the way we were talking about something, writing about something, the concepts that we were trying to explain and the way that we were explaining them. At that point in time, I think that they were appropriate and I think that they were correct. We just, again, we didn't know what we didn't know yet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, was looking back at, these are reports from 2018. So this is just after the founding of the company, the first few months of business. And the thing that stuck out to me was in the techniques and the tactics that we were using to build these insights. It really brought back a lot of memories of where we had been previously and how little time we had to invest in professional development and training. I was looking at, again, this one food and beverage report and, some of the text mining stuff. And now looking back at it, like, oh, that's totally not the right way to do, that particular type of mining. We did it using a network graph, and we should have been using today we would use like a linear SVM model to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, because there was a lot of chaff in that report. But that was a consequence of, at the company we used to work at, 100% of our time during the 40-hour work week was dedicated towards mostly meetings and sales. And so there was no time to set aside to say, okay, well, we need a couple hours a week to learn how to do, support vector machines, to learn how to do gradient boosting models and stuff, which are all, these fancy machine learning and statistical techniques. But we didn't have that time. And now, 3 years later, we've made the time. We have the ability to say we're going to make the time to do this. And we have these new techniques, new tactics and stuff like that make it more capable. If you're somebody who works at a company where they're not willing to make the time, how much of that should you be investing in yourself anyway, just like after hours?
It depends. It depends on what you want out of your career. If it's just a paycheck, then maybe none. Maybe, it's just a means to an end, and it just pays for everything else in your life that you're passionate about. So I think it really, depends on the situation you're in, and it depends on what you want out of your career. And so I do not believe that every single person needs to continue to advance in their career. Not every single person needs, consistent professional development. And I say that because some people are exactly where they're meant to be. Some people are completely happy and satisfied doing exactly what they're doing. Now, that doesn't mean that the job itself isn't going to evolve and change and that they won't learn new things, but they don't need to necessarily go out of their way to, step out of the box and, learn all these new things that have nothing to do with their job to advance if they're happy where they are. So I think that for me is the first caveat. Now, you and I, Chris, were never happy with what we had. We always wanted more. We wanted to do more things. And we still want those things. We still want to do more than what we're doing, even though now, we own the company that we work for. And so that is a testament to who we are as individuals. So we each individually want to do more than what we're doing. So we make the time, we make it a priority to invest in ourselves to learn more than what we know. Now, I could just go sit back and go, you know what? I'm good. I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and I don't need to think outside of what I'm doing. I don't need to learn more than this. And that might be okay. We'll find out in 2 years when I run up against a brick wall and don't know anymore. But, that's my own personal choice. So that's my feeling on it. But if you're someone who works at a company who doesn't necessarily get what they need in terms of learning and professional development, then it is then incumbent upon you to be self-motivated to make time for it. Maybe it's not during work hours, maybe it's after hours, but I don't think there's a magic if you do it 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week or 10 hours a week. It really depends on what the thing is and what your end goal is.
Right now, as we record this, it's sort of the third quarter of 2021. It very much is an employee's market. Companies are trying to hire for pretty much anybody.
Hmm.
However, all these things go in cycles. At some point you'll be an employer's market again, and vice
Hmm.
versa. The challenge with professional development and training is that it's not one of those things. It's kind of like SEO. It's not one of those things that's, oh, today I'm going to do professional development training, or you're like, today I'm going to go to the gym. It's like the one time this year you've gone to the gym, and you expect results immediately. Whereas we know from a fitness perspective, no, it's kind of something you got to do all the time if you want to keep what you've gotten and improve. And what I would be concerned about for the person who doesn't necessarily feel that motivation is when it becomes an employer's market, you're like, crap, I need to hit the gym professionally, from a professional development perspective. And there's been all this time where you haven't, maybe you haven't had to and stuff like that. So how do you balance that person being happy in what they're doing with helping them prepare for the eventuality that the job market may change, or to your point, the job may totally change and they're no longer even qualified to do the job. Like a robot has taken over 80% of the tasks and they need to be the one to now manage the robot, kind of thing.
Well, I think again, it goes back to, it depends. It depends on what that individual wants and it depends on what the company needs. And so right now it might be an employees market. So, there's, more jobs than there are people applying for them. But that doesn't mean that you have to apply for everything. And so if I were looking for a job right now, I would really try to challenge myself to focus and say, what is it that I really, really want to do? And focus my time there. So if I had my sights set on, just for example, if I had my sights set on working behind the scenes at Etsy, for example, then I should probably, make sure that I have certifications in e-commerce and certifications in, you know, um, Instagram and social media and those kinds of things, knowing sort of the inner workings of how a company like Etsy works. And so I would need to focus my time and not try to be everything to everyone. And I think that that's sort of the general advice is what is it that you want to do? So Chris, I know in your last newsletter, you were talking about how, you're not very good at social media, for example. Well, that's okay. That doesn't mean, okay, so you've acknowledged you're not great at social media. Are you supposed to go out and get a Facebook certificate? No, because that doesn't do anything to advance where you're at right now. Maybe down the line you can make that decision, but where you sit right now, getting more education, getting more advanced in social media isn't going to do anything for you because it's not the kind of job that you're interested in going after. It's not the kind of job that you're interested in doing. So I do think that there is a lot of distraction when it comes to professional development. We try to glom onto everything so that we can look like, shiny and perfect on our resumes. But to me, as someone who's a hiring manager, it almost kind of feels like you have even less focus. Like, what is it that you really want to do? What is it that you're really good at? And so when we sort of flip the switch and say it's an employer's market and they're looking for those highly specialized roles, well, what's going to happen to the generalist who's tried to specialize in everything?
It reminds me of a thing that management consultant David Maester used to say. He's like, "Here's our brochure with our 72 specialties to prove that we know nothing about any one particular thing."
It's true. You can't be everything to everyone. It reminds me of when I was in high school and one of my teachers was writing a college recommendation for me. And, he had said she's a jack of all trades, master of none. And at the time, that really hurt my feelings. But looking back, even though that was probably the wrong thing for him to be writing about me, he wasn't wrong. I've always in my career been a bit of a jack of all trades. And the reason for that is because I never knew what I wanted to do. And it took me a long time to figure it out. So I've always dabbled in a little bit of everything, but I was master of none of it. The only thing I've ever been 100% confident in is managing people. So I finally found a place where I could hone that skill and focus solely on that. And I'll be the first to admit, like in the company, I'm not the strongest marketer. I'm a decent writer, but not the strongest writer. But those are not the things that I necessarily need to bring to the table. My role here now is to keep the trains running, keep people in line, and keep things moving forward. That's, where I specialize. And so if I were going to, you know, spend my time doing more professional development, it would be on things like organizational behavior, team psychology, motivation, those kinds of things.
From that perspective, if we think about a company like a person, and every time we do a sales pitch, this is essentially a you're applying for a job in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, right? How would you then describe what the company is in terms of in a person sense? Like I am, as a person, am a data scientist, right? And I know this because it's what I do professionally, but it's also what I do personally. I spend time after hours writing code just for fun on like hobbies and things that I do, and it's clear to me that that's what I am. So if I was to take that knowledge about who I am and what I do, I could, if I was looking for work, be very clear about, okay, I'm applying for this, I'm applying for this, I can do this, etc. I'm not going to be a social media marketer. I'm not going to be this. I'm going to be a marketing data scientist.
Mhm.
When we think about an organization, whether it's your department, whether it's your company brand as a whole, how do you get down to that level of clarity to say, like, this is what we do, this is how, so we know to apply for these jobs?
It's a lot of self-awareness, and that's a hard thing to come by. And so, Chris, you are incredibly self-aware because you live and breathe data science. It's your passion. It's what you really enjoy doing. Whereas I wouldn't say I live and breathe the work that I do, but I inherently listen and I inherently learn about people and people management. And I do that, I'm an observer. I'm an introvert and I observe a lot. And so I found a way to use that in my professional career. Um, so I think it's like step one is it's learning about who you are as a person, not the certifications that you've checked off. And so I think that's a big part of it is, you know, we talk about like that work life balance and those boundaries, and that's all well and good. And that's still really important, but you cannot inherently change who a person is. And so I cannot inherently say, okay, Chris, You are no longer going to be a data scientist in your free time. You have to pick up juggling, or you have to learn watercolors, or whatever the thing is. Those don't interest you. If they did, you probably would have tried them already. And so it's the same with me. Like, you can't tell me, okay, Katie, in your free
You're
time,
going to
you
learn to
have to
code.
learn. Well, that's it. You have to learn to code. Like, I don't want to. I'm not interested in that. It's not even like a, like, distant hobby of mine. I just don't want to do it. And so I think that's number one, figure out who you are as a person. And I think, when I've talked with friends of mine who were looking for jobs, the big thing is don't focus just on the skills that you've learned. Think sort of at that full 360 of a person, of like, what are the things that you enjoy doing? So a friend of mine, actually one of my old bosses, but she became a super close friend of mine. She went from being the director of the product management department to being a postpartum doula. And that was the career switch, because she did that exact exercise. She put up all of her post-its of like, what do I enjoy? What don't I enjoy? And when she looked at it all together, she goes, I want nothing to do with working in the tech field. I actually don't enjoy it at all. I want to go help people deliver babies. And so it was like, where did that come from? But when you step back and look at who she was as a person, it made complete sense. And now she's made a really great career out of it.
So if Trust Insights was a person, who would it be?
Oh man, Chris, you got the hard hitting questions on a Monday morning, don't you? If Trust Insights were a person, it would be an incredibly awkward person. Um, I don't think it's, I think okay, let me really focus for a second. So if Trust Insights were a person, it would be someone who spent a lot of time listening to what kinds of problems their friends were having, their friends being the clients in this instance. And instead of just immediately jumping to, well, you can solve it this way, solve it this way, solve it this way, they would really say, okay, tell me more about this problem. Tell me more about it. So they wouldn't immediately jump to conclusions and solutions. They're the kind of friend who would really continue to listen for as long as possible and then say, are you just telling me because you need to unload on me, or are you telling me because you want me to help you? If you want me to help you, I have some solutions that you can try, and you can trust me to do them because I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. So when I think of Trust Insights as a person, that's the kind of person I think, would sort of like form from the things that we do. And the solutions would be, well, you've asked me to build a table. The good news is I'm a really skilled carpenter. I've done this 1,000 times. So you're going to get an excellent table that's going to last a lifetime.
Okay. So if we know who we are, then what's the next step in that process?
I mean, I don't know where these questions are coming from this morning, Chris, but I'm,
Well,
I'm trying my best here.
the reason I say that is because, from a person's perspective, once you know who you are, then you can figure out what jobs to apply for. Like, I should not apply for a social media manager job. It would be a
Correct.
disaster, right? I should not apply for a community management job. It'd be a hilarious disaster. I should probably not be on-air talent, right? All this is, I should be a data scientist, right? You should
Yep.
be a manager of people.
Mm-hmm.
So if the company is this person that, this
Mm-hmm.
meta aggregate, then what should that person be doing for looking for work? Because when we think about it, that's essentially, I see where you're going with this. Like, who are you? What do you
Mm-hmm.
do? And then what's
Mm-hmm.
special about what you do that nobody else can do? So, and you do that with your friends, right? You say, like,
Right.
like, look at your LinkedIn profile. Like, your LinkedIn profile reads like every other person I've ever read. Like, I did this thing, and like, cool. So if we think about Trust Insights as that person that's a good listener and that can be solution oriented when they're not being a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
what should they be doing? Where should Trust Insights as a person be applying for jobs?
So if we think about that Trust Insights, LinkedIn profile as the person, so one of the things that um, I'm working on right now, which will go up on our, company profile, are those case studies. So, clear demonstrations of how we've listened to what the problem was, offered solutions, solved that problem, and got results. because really, if someone's coming to you with a problem and they want your help, they're hoping for results. They're hoping for you to actually solve that problem in a productive way. And we, Trust Insights, the company and the person, need to demonstrate that we can do that. And so we need to first demonstrate that we can do that. And then we can say, okay, we're open for business. We want to listen to what the problems you have and we want to help you solve them. And so we do that through some of the workshops that we do. So we'll take a common problem like attribution analysis, for example, and we just did this last week, we'll spend 4 hours explaining here's all the different components, here's where it goes wrong, here's what some of the solutions are, here's the quick wins and the longer term things that you would need to do. So we really try to dissect very common issues that people in our industry have so that they can number one, understand, oh, you know what, this is the problem that I'm having. I see myself in this issue. And then number two, okay, here's what the solution is. I can either do this myself or I can bring on my good friend, Trust Insights, to help me do this because I know that they're going to guide me through it and get me to the solution that I need.
When you think about that person, like helping your friend with, that you've got, and they say, hey, Katie, my LinkedIn profile is a hot mess. Can you help me out with this?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do to differentiate them? Because, like, for example, when I think about what differentiates me, I understand marketing really well.
Mm-hmm.
I understand data science really well. I'm definitely not the world's best data scientist. I'm definitely not the world's best marketer, but I joke that I'm a better marketer than any data scientist and better data scientist than a marketer because this is two things together. But I also know that I can learn stuff really quickly and get up to speed in subject matters reasonably fast, not to the extent that someone with who spent their life doing it, but for example, when the pandemic first started happening, I followed a bunch of experts and learned really quick about things like immunology and stuff. Again, not in any way, shape, or form close to being able to do it as a profession, but enough to know essentially what's BS and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't eat horse medications. So when you think about that Trust Insights person now, and you know who they are and you know what they do, how do you then say, okay, well, what does this person do better than Accenture or Deloitte or these other companies that all say they do the same thing? How do you help this person improve their LinkedIn profile?
Well, I guess the first question I would ask is, if I'm talking to my friend, I would say, well, what have you done that you're really proud of? Tell me about a project that you did that you were really excited to work on start to finish, even if you only had like a small piece in that project. And it's really, you can fake authenticity, but people figure it out pretty quickly. And so you have to, again, sort of stay true to who you are. So we've had this conversation for the company, when we first started out, I think we tried to be a little bit of everything to everyone. And then we've really, over the years, focused in on we can solve a lot of problems, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should. It doesn't necessarily mean we're the best at it. And so we really, not every day, but we really try to focus on here are the, two or three things we do really, really well that, we get really excited about. And so I would say it's highlighting that stuff. So if I'm talking to one of my friends and they're like, well, I don't know, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be a work related thing. Tell me about something you did, on your own personal time that, you were really excited about doing, and then sort of think of it that way. And I think that it's highlighting who the person is as an individual, whether it's work or not work related, is really what helps them stand out. And it's the same thing that's true for Trust Insights. So, maybe we've done things for ourselves that we haven't necessarily done for other companies that we're still really excited about. And that we want to be like, hey, we did this really cool thing over here. We think everybody should know about it because we're super excited about it. And then you start to attract those like minded people who are like, yeah, I'm also really excited about that thing. I don't know what to do with it, but it's really cool. So let me tell my friend over here who's also really excited about this thing. And so you start to organically, grow that network of like-minded people who are also, really jazzed by the thing that you're doing. And so for me, that kind of authentic network building and bringing on the right people is really where you start to see that success. Because yeah, we could, pull data for anyone at any time, but does that mean that it's work that we value? Does that mean it's work that the client values? And, the answer is, I don't know. Maybe they're just checking a box. And at the end of the day, yeah, we can collect that paycheck, but did we feel good about the work that we did?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that and you walk through this process, because it's the exact opposite of pretty much everything that we've encountered. So, and I mean this seriously. We've been through things, category design, brand positioning, all these different exercises with multiple consultants over the years, and they all start in reverse. Like, oh, what are the things? What's the big idea, the brand position? And none of them ever started with the people.
Hmm.
None of them ever started with who are you. Like,
Hmm.
what are you passionate about? What have you done? And then what are the things that you're proud of? And I feel like from a consulting process perspective, from an organizational brand development process, that's a more sustainable way to go, especially if the people change. When we look back at the last few companies we worked with, when a company got acquired, the people changed, and suddenly the company changed. Sometimes overnight. Two or three companies ago, I remember right after acquisition, they flushed the whole executive suite, and suddenly it was a completely different company overnight. Different service, different brand, different everything, the different ways we communicated, and the company fell apart in terms of its
Hmm.
brand promise because the people were not there who brought that brand to life. And so, from a consulting perspective, I think it's really interesting that you start with the people instead of all the things that every other traditional brand consultant starts with, which is not the people.
Well, so there's a really, easy way to think about it. So, Chris, we talk about this in terms of content creation and content marketing. So let's say we were both given the same assignment. We're both asked to write about, the new Google Analytics 4. You know, we each are going to approach it differently. We're each going to come up with a different piece of content around Google Analytics 4 because we have different perspectives, we have different point of views, we have different agendas when it comes to what we're getting out of the system. So even though we're given the exact same assignment, you're going to get two very different pieces of content. And so if I can first understand who are the players, who are the people writing this, then I'll have a better sense of, okay, if I know the kind of content that I need to get out of this, then I know who I need to ask to write this content. Or maybe I want to see what the different individual perspectives are going to be. And I think that so, when we've gone through branding exercises before and worked at other companies, you're absolutely right. It didn't start with the person. And I think that when we started Trust Insights, we didn't start with who we are, who Chris and Katie are. And I think that so to the original question of that, 3 years later after action and review, I would say that's the biggest thing. We focused too much on the solutions. And yeah, the solutions themselves haven't evolved much, but the approach and how we get there has evolved. And that's why our messaging has evolved. That's why our branding has evolved. That's why, the kinds of services that we offer, the way in which we approach them has evolved. That's why, we've started developing the 5P change management framework that applies to every single thing we do. And now when I look back, I don't think, "Oh man, why aren't we doing it that way?" We didn't know because you and I as business owners have changed and grown so much, whether or not we sit back and realize it or we just go with it. But what we're doing is we're taking everything we learn and applying it into the business because we are putting people first in the business.
And when I look back at those old reports and stuff, part of that cringe factor is because I recognize how much I myself as a person have changed since
Mhm.
writing those reports. How much more I know now than I did then. It's like, oh, I should have known that. But I think it's very interesting because when we talk then to clients who are saying like, hey, how do I help my team write better content? It's an interesting twist to say, well, who are the people first? Let's understand the people, because you could have a whole roster of people like, yeah, guess what? You need a new roster of people because these are not the people that can get the
Mhm.
job done.
And that's exactly it. And, I know you like to say, like, replace all the people with robots, but we are pretty far from that. for a lot of the kinds of companies that we work with. And if you don't think about the people first, the rest of the stuff just won't come together. And that's where, we were talking about this last week with the attribution modeling. You can have, the most advanced, code and model and pristine data. But if you don't have the people to execute it, to do something with it, to understand it, it doesn't matter because it's just going to sit there.
Yep, it's just a decoration.
Mm-hmm.
So the key lesson after 3 years is it always comes down to the people, because they are the people who work at the company and who make the company what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not if you look back and things haven't changed, it's probably an indication that you've got a people problem in some way. And so if you've got questions about what we've talked about in today's episode and want to discuss it, or ask questions about your own company or brand or things like that, and how you're working with the people you have, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 1,900 other folks are talking about marketing and analytics and stuff all day long. And if you're wherever it is you're watching or listening to this show, if you want to get on a platform of your choice, chances are we support it. Go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast to get the show wherever it suits you best. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. Need help making your marketing platforms, processes, and people work smarter? Visit trustinsights.ai today and learn how we can help you deliver more impact.